Daniel had it all: a high-paying job, a comfortable apartment, a life that seemed perfect. But one day, he shut his laptop, walked away from everything, and disappeared into the forests of Oregon. He didn't tell anyone a word, leaving behind only a single line on his blog. "I'm going to search for something I've never seen, but I've always felt was out there somewhere." No one expected that what would help him find the light would begin with a dying dog on the side of the road. Daniel used to be the poster child for early success in Seattle's tech scene. By the age of 35, he was a lead developer at a startup valued in the millions. His apartment overlooked Lake Union, with freshly brewed coffee and soft music from a smart speaker greeting him every morning. But strangely, each day he woke up feeling like he was stuck in a cold, invisible loop. It wasn't depression, or at least he didn't think so. Daniel still went to work, still smiled at the right times, still replied to emails quickly and checked in on time. But something inside him was wearing down, day by day, month by month. A kind of yearning he couldn't name. One night, after staring blankly at his code editor for hours without typing a single line, Daniel stood up, walked out onto the balcony, and cried. Not for any specific reason. Just because there was so much noise in his head, yet not a single sound truly reached his heart. A few weeks later, Daniel quit his job. He gave up his apartment, sold most of his belongings, locked his social media accounts, and wiped his calendar clean. Some of his close friends thought he was falling apart. But Daniel didn't call it a breakdown. To him, it was something necessary, a journey inward, as those self-help books like to say. His destination, a small wooden cabin deep in an Oregon national forest, where there was no cell service, only birdsong, wind, and the smell of damp wood year-round. Daniel set himself a year-long challenge: meditate daily, read spiritual classics, cut off all outside contact, and most importantly, expect nothing. The first week brought relief. The second felt strange. By the third month, Daniel began doubting everything. He had believed that if he could just get quiet and disciplined enough, the light would find him. But all he got was silence. No strange dreams, no deep meditative states, no signs from the universe. Just the sound of wind scraping against the wooden door, and a mind filling up with questions. What am I really here to find? Or am I just running away? That question haunted Daniel night after night. He began jotting down fragmented thoughts in an old leather notebook, starting with one line. If something truly exists inside me, why have I never felt it? And so the real journey began, not upward toward the heavens, but inward, into what is deeply human, quietly small, and unmistakably real. In the fourth month, Daniel began counting down the days until he could return. Each morning, he still sat down to meditate, but instead of silence, his mind buzzed with questions. What am I even doing here? Do I truly believe in something deeper, or am I just trying to feel special? The stillness he once cherished had grown terrifying. He felt like he was fading, leaving no trace behind, like a program quietly deleted from the system without anyone noticing. One gray, rainy morning, Daniel decided to leave the cabin. He stepped onto the leaf-strewn trail with no clear destination. He just knew he couldn't sit there anymore, waiting for something that wouldn't come. He walked for hours through the woods, until the dirt path opened into a clearing. There, he saw an old man sitting beside a large stone, carefully sanding down its edges with a small piece of sandpaper. Daniel stood watching for a long while, curiosity getting the better of him. "What are you doing?" he asked. The old man looked up and smiled. "I'm shaping this stone into a bench. So when the sun sets, I'll have a place to sit and watch it." Daniel glanced at the stone, then at the flimsy sandpaper in the man's hand. The two didn't seem to belong in the same reality. "How long will it take you to finish?" "That doesn't matter," the man said gently. "I just work on it a little bit every day." Daniel stood still. That man was devoting time each day to something nearly impossible, not to prove anything, but simply because it was what he wanted to do, fully and quietly. It felt like a soft slap to the face. All this time, Daniel had demanded some sacred result from his meditation, yet he hadn't shown even the quiet patience of someone sanding a stone to sit and watch the sun. He returned to the cabin that day ashamed, but also determined. He committed to another year of practice. No more expectations. Just breath by breath, step by step. And then another year passed. And another. 3 years. No strange dreams. No light. No whispers from the universe. One freezing morning at the start of winter, Daniel packed his things, locked the cabin, and walked away again, this time, with finality. No more hope, no more spiritual goals. Maybe I'm just an ordinary person. And maybe that's enough. But just as Daniel let go of everything, fate led him to a moment that would change him forever. It began with a small, motionless creature lying by the side of the road. That afternoon, a light rain began to fall. The dirt road turned soft and muddy as Daniel walked without direction. His mind held no more questions, no more answers, just a feeling of emptiness that, somehow, didn't hurt. It was as if he had finally accepted that some things in life, no matter how hard you try, will simply never come. As he turned down a narrow trail leading into a valley, he stopped. A faint whimper, barely audible over the rain and the rustling of wet leaves. Daniel looked around and saw it, a dog, soaked through, curled beneath a pine tree. Its body was skin and bones, the once golden fur now matted in clumps. Its lower half was nearly paralyzed, dragging a trail of blood and mud behind it. He approached, and the dog tried to bark, but only weak gasps came out. It dragged itself forward with its front legs either trying to flee or clinging to the last scraps of life. Daniel knelt down and didn't move for a moment. Not out of fear, but because the raw pain of this helpless creature hit him straight in the heart. He didn't think. He simply took off his jacket, laid it gently on the ground, and lifted the dog, even as it whimpered in pain. Its wounds were raw, infested with maggots. Daniel felt his stomach turn, but kept going. He tore up an old shirt to bandage what he could, then carried the dog along the path more than 3 miles to a small rescue outpost he remembered seeing when he first arrived. By the time he reached it, his arms were numb, his clothes soaked, his shirt stained with blood and dirt. And yet, strangely, he didn't feel tired. He wasn't afraid. He didn't pity himself. He only knew one thing. He couldn't leave this animal behind. Not because it was pitiful, but because he simply couldn't not do something. That night, in his spare room beside the rescue station, Daniel sat quietly by the window. The rain was still falling. He thought about the dog's eyes, that weak resistance at first, and then the way it slowly surrendered in his arms, as if for the first time, someone had truly seen its pain. And in that moment, for the first time in 6 years, Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't enlightenment. It wasn't a beam of light. It was something warm, deep, and unnamed, as if a small door in his heart had quietly creaked open. He no longer wished to meet a master or witness a divine sign. But that night, Daniel began to realize, maybe what I've been searching for was never on the mountaintop. Maybe it lives right here, where someone kneels for the pain of another. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, Daniel returned to the rescue station to ask about the dog. The staff told him they weren't sure it would make it, the wounds were too severe, the infection had spread. But there was something different in the way they looked at him, as if he was no longer just a stranger, but part of something real. He sat quietly in the backyard, where thin sunlight filtered through dew-covered grass. Daniel opened his weathered notebook, intending to jot down a few thoughts, but his hand paused. A sentence surfaced in his mind, not from a book, not from a dream. Just an idea that appeared. I'd been beside life and death, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. In that moment, the world seemed to slow down. Every sound, the wind, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of insects, became sharply clear. Daniel felt lighter, not in a mystical way, but as if he'd just set down a burden he didn't even know he'd been carrying. He stood, walked to the narrow trail that led into the woods. It was the same path he'd wandered aimlessly the day before, but now, it felt familiar, almost like a piece of him. When he reached the bend, the spot where he'd found the dog, he stopped. There was nothing there now but a shallow puddle and a few fading paw prints. And then, he saw a man standing a few meters away. Tall and lean, wearing a long coat, with a calm, steady gaze. Daniel was startled by how silently he'd appeared. He hadn't heard a single step. They faced each other in silence. "Do you remember the dog's eyes?" the man asked. Daniel nodded. He didn't question how the man knew. "That look, it's part of you. The pain, the resistance, and that fragile belief in kindness." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" "I've always been here. But you can only see me once you learn to see with your heart." Daniel opened his mouth to ask more, but the man stepped back, and in a blink, he was gone. Only the soft wind remained, brushing past him, carrying with it a warmth that spread through Daniel's body, as if something inside him had quietly been put back together. He didn't know if it was a hallucination, a spiritual vision, or just a trick of an exhausted mind. But it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was this. True compassion, the kind that needs no reason and asks for nothing in return, was the key to the door he'd been searching for all these years. Not light itself, but the ability to see light in even the most broken things. And from that moment on, Daniel knew he would never be the same again. Daniel left the rescue station that afternoon. He didn't go back to the cabin. He didn't need to. Something inside him had opened, and the world, the very same world he once wanted to retreat from, now felt more alive and meaningful than ever. He returned to Seattle. Not to resume his old job, but to start over, with something he had never truly possessed before, a real reason to live. None of his friends fully understood what had happened to Daniel. They just saw that he had changed. He no longer spoke much about finding himself, or raved about meditation or higher states of consciousness. Instead, he volunteered at animal shelters. He listened quietly, fully, to others. He helped where he could. And he began to write not technical blogs or lofty philosophy, but small, heartfelt stories about deeply human moments. One of his most widely shared pieces began with the line, "I used to think enlightenment was about seeing light. But it turns out, it's just kneeling down to touch the pain of a dying creature, expecting nothing, except to be fully present with it." At a small community talk in the local library, someone asked him what had changed his life. Daniel smiled and said simply, "I learned a new language. Not from books, but from a look. One that was in pain, but hadn't given up. That language," he said, "was compassion. Not pity. Not moral obligation. But the ability to see the broken part of someone else as if it were your own. No saving required. No advice needed. Just presence with your whole heart." Daniel never claimed to be enlightened, and he didn't seek fame from his story. He just lived, but more deeply, more connected, and most importantly, with the awareness that every moment we choose love over indifference is a step toward the light. And one day, while sorting through old books, Daniel happened to flip open the notebook he had used in the cabin. On the first page, the shaky handwriting from years ago still read, "If something truly exists inside me, why have I never felt it?" He smiled gently, and wrote one more line beneath it. "Because I searched with my mind. Now, I've learned to search with compassion. Sometimes, to find the light in life, we don't need to look up at the sky. We just need to kneel deeply before the pain of a fragile being we once walked past. And there, begin to see ourselves."